What's going on, guys? Welcome back. And the Obi-Wan Kenobi series has finally come to an end. A few weeks ago, I made a video on the first half of the series talking about how bad I thought it was, and it blew up. I was shocked by how many views it got just within a few hours of its release, so thank you guys for that. But I also said in that video that I may or may not talk about the rest of the series, but I had come so far, so I decided to watch the rest of it, and the burning question in the back of your mind is probably, does it get better? Because I already had low expectations for this series to begin with, so the first half of it fell below my already low expectations, and it could only get better from there, right? Well, no. This series, for the most part, stayed consistently bad, and the fourth episode was somehow able to surpass the previous one in its levels of stupidity. This episode begins with Obi-Wan being rushed to a Bacta tank after suffering some pretty severe burns at the hands of Vader at the end of the previous episode, but he recovers from those burns in maybe 5 seconds, and we are introduced to a whole band of new characters that we spend like 5 seconds of time with and are given no reason to care about. Keep that in mind for later. Obi-Wan and Tala try to convince this new character to help them rescue Leia, but he reveals that he once had a Force-sensitive wife who was found out by the Inquisitors and thus refuses to help them. Until he has a weird 180 mood swing and says this.
Look, if you want my help, you got it.
Well, that was one of the most illogical and lazily written changes in a character's motivations that I have ever seen, but we can't dwell on that for too long, because our characters formulate a plan to break into Fortress Inquisitorius, which has improved its security very minimally since Cal Kestis broke in 5 years beforehand, using literally the exact same plan. All they've done is install some sort of security gate that Tala is able to get through by threatening a fellow officer that she will report him to the Grand Inquisitor, who at this point is assumed dead, but we'll ignore that contrivance in the writing, as Obi-Wan breaks in and knocks out a stormtrooper, but rather than putting on the stormtrooper's armor, which would alleviate him of any suspicion, Obi-Wan decides to sneak around the corridors, attempting to avoid detection in a tensionless scene, because there are very obvious solutions to the situations that the characters find themselves in, but they're idiots, I suppose, and don't see the options that are right in front of them. Obi-Wan then discovers that Leia is about to be tortured, and he asks Tala to cause a distraction for him. She asks him what the situation is, and he doesn't tell her. But she somehow knows to call the third sister away from torturing Leia. Obi-Wan didn't give her any information. So how was she able to deduce the fact that the situation had something to do with Reva or the third sister? Plot convenience. Obi-Wan and Leia begin to escape, but they're intercepted by legions of stormtroopers, and they don't send in any Purge Troopers to combat Obi-Wan. If you don't know what Purge Troopers are, they are the elite of the elite, and are trained inside of Fortress Inquisitorius to combat Jedi. You fight them multiple times in the game Jedi Fallen Order, and we do see some of them in Kenobi, but they are only long-ranged ones that use blasters. In Fallen Order, we are shown that the Purge Troopers are trained for close-range combat. They use staffs, hammers, batons, etc. So if they had sent in a group of close-range Purge Troopers to fight Obi-Wan, then he might have actually had a hard time. But nah, they just send in a bunch of incompetent stormtroopers and he disposes of them with ease. Reva catches on to their scheme and a fight breaks out, but thankfully some of Obi-Wan's new allies arrive in snowspeeders to rescue them. One of the snowspeeders begins firing on Reva, and she decides to deflect the laser bolts in the most inefficient manner possible, acting as though she only has a single-bladed lightsaber, when in reality she has a double-bladed one that can spin. If you had turned on that function, I can imagine that it would have been a lot more effective at deflecting rapid-fire laser bolts. But that's not even the funniest part. Then this happens. No! Wait! Who? They gave us no development for this character, or any of these characters for that matter, and they spend so long mourning his death. There's literally a 5-minute scene at the end of this episode where all of the characters cry about Wade. Obi-Wan didn't know this guy, Leia didn't know this guy, and we don't know any of these people. If they had spent any time developing this group as a collective, then I may have been able to feel some sort of emotion during this scene. But I have no reason to care, and they spend so long on it. Vader then gets really mad at Reva, which makes no sense, because in the previous episode he stated that Obi-Wan was his only priority, yet he disappeared for an entire episode and didn't do anything. Meanwhile, Raven nearly captured him. What is your logic, dude? He spares Reva's life, though, because she reveals that she secretly planted a tracking device on board their ship, and of course the tracking device is on Leia's little droid, and just in case you didn't pick up on that, its eyes turn red instead of blue, because, you know, subtlety doesn't exist in the Star Wars universe. Now we move on to the 5th episode, which, as I'm sure you have heard by now, is quite easily the best episode of this series. That's not saying much, but I do have some moderately good things to say about it. The Obi-Wan and Anakin flashbacks playing in parallel to the cat and mouse game between Obi-Wan and Vader in current time is a cool concept. One that I don't think is executed perfectly, but it's executed decently well. I like the final twist with there being a second ship escaping at the last second, Obi-Wan yet again pulling out the rug from under Anakin, just like how he beat him during their training in the past, proving the fact that Obi-Wan will always best Anakin. Anakin's judgment will always be clouded by his anger. His emotions blind him from seeing past his own ego, and I find that very interesting. It's not great, because practically everything surrounding it is bad, but I will give them some credit. And this episode finally gives Reva some humanization as a character. We learn that she was truly a youngling during Order 66 and that Anakin murdered everyone she ever cared about. She doesn't want to prove herself to her superiors, she just wants revenge on Vader for what he did to her. And that's interesting. I like the idea that there was a seed planted within the Empire with the intent to assassinate either Vader or Palpatine, the two figureheads of the Empire. That's an interesting concept, but unfortunately it's not executed very well and it kind of falls flat by the end of the series. Tala and the lifter droid die. I guess that's worth mentioning. I cared about them a little bit more than Wade, but Tala had only explained her past to Obi-Wan in a scene 10 minutes before that, and I could tell they were just putting in the bare minimum effort to develop her character so we'd feel bad when she died. At this point in the show, the creative team probably realized that they couldn't kill off any significant characters in the story, so they made a big deal out of these characters dying who we know nothing about and have no reason to care about. They tried to give these characters their Rogue One sacrifice moment, but that only worked in that film because they'd had a movie to build up their characters. The circumstances of the moment are also really stupid. Tala is about to commit suicide by using a thermal detonator, and Obi-Wan is trying to make it to her, but he gets stopped by a single stormtrooper. Obi-Wan, you wiped out a platoon of them in the previous episode. Why can't you take out one stormtrooper? This doesn't make any sense. The ending of the episode is also terrible. After a pretty good fight scene between Vader and Reva where she finally remembers how to use the second blade of her lightsaber, yay! He stabs her through the chest, apparently the same way he did when she was a youngling, and it is revealed that the Grand Inquisitor is still alive. I guess they didn't break the canon of Rebels after all. Then he's just like, peace out, bye, we're gonna leave you here to die, conveniently with your lightsaber. What? The Grand Inquisitor literally says something along the lines of, anger motivates you to stay alive, implying that that's how he survived the stab wound he received from Reva. Does he not therefore think that Reva may survive the same thing? Heck, she literally did before. Vader had the perfect opportunity to ensure that she was dead. He had a lightsaber in each hand. I thought he was gonna Count Dooku her, but he just stabbed her and walked away, not ensuring her demise. That is unbelievably dumb. But what's even dumber is that Bail Organa sends a message to Obi-Wan that reveals Owen, Luke, and their location. Of course, Reva conveniently discovers this message at the end of the episode, and that leads us into the finale. This episode consists of two plot lines going on in tandem with each other. One focused on Obi-Wan, and one focused on Reva. They are both incredibly nonsensical and stupid. Let's start with Obi-Wan's. Obi-Wan is still on the transport ship from the previous episode that is being pursued by an Imperial Star Destroyer that is flying extremely slowly and missing every single shot, yet we are for some reason meant to fear for the lives of these characters. Obi-Wan decides to lure Vader away in a smaller ship, and the Imperials completely reorient the position of the Star Destroyer in order to deploy Vader's shuttle. They could have kept in pursuit of the larger transport while deploying Vader separately to chase down Obi-Wan. Scrap that, they could have just deployed a squadron of TIE fighters to disable their vessel. There are several moments in this show when a squadron of TIE fighters could have very easily dealt with their enemies, but I guess they just forgot that they have them at their disposal. Obi-Wan and Vader then confront each other on some random planet, and we have a bunch of dialogue ripping off other pieces of Star Wars media. Obi-Wan says, "I will do what I must. Remember Revenge of the Sith?" And Vader responds by saying, "Then you will die. Remember, rebels?" We are treated to yet another lame fight scene between the two that is terribly choreographed. It's kind of sad to say, but the best fight scene in the show was between Vader and Reva, not Vader and Obi-Wan. Vader then traps Obi-Wan under a bunch of rocks and yet again walks away without ensuring that his opponent is actually dead. This series has a strange habit of doing this, but we'll get back to that later. In a Spider-Man Homecoming ripoff scene, Obi-Wan builds up the strength to lift the rocks off of him and turns into Jesus, beating up Vader in 5 seconds, slicing off half of his mask. Are we seriously ripping off Rebels? Again? I know there was meant to be some sort of emotional impact during this scene, but I couldn't get over the fact that everything about it is ripping off other Star Wars stories. The dialogue, the visual of Vader's mask being cut in half, Vader and Anakin's voices being mixed together. Everything about it is ripping off Rebels. This entire scene is emotionally manipulative, and I hated it. Vader then says that Obi-Wan did not kill Anakin. He did. And this is meant to give Obi-Wan some sort of closure as he finally realizes that he was not responsible for the creation of this monster and that, as he puts it, his friend is truly gone. But rather than killing him right then and there in his weakened state, potentially saving millions of people from Vader's wrath in the future, he just walks away. What? If anything, Obi-Wan was less merciful in Revenge of the Sith. He straight up sliced Anakin into bits and left him to burn alive, but now he just doesn't kill him. I suppose you could say it's not the Jedi way, but the Jedi aren't opposed to killing evil people. It's not like after Anakin killed Dooku in Revenge of the Sith, they were like, "You can't do that, man," because he was evil. If Obi-Wan killed Vader, then nobody would care. But they can't break the canon of the franchise, so he just walks away. This is dumb on so many levels. Let's move on to Reva's side of the story, wherein she tracks down Luke on Tatooine after somehow deducing the fact that he's Vader's son. The message that Bail Organa sent to Obi-Wan simply said that he was going to assist Owen in taking care of Luke on Tatooine, and that he must not find out about the children. How would one possibly deduce the fact that the children in question belong to Darth Vader himself? I understand that Reva wants revenge on Vader, and she's going to go about that by killing Luke, but how did she learn that Luke is his son? I understand that she found out Bail Organa and Obi-Wan were connected during the Clone Wars and used Leia as bait to draw Obi-Wan out because she's Bail's daughter. That makes sense to me. This doesn't make any sense to me at all. What also doesn't make any sense is that Bail Organa never shows up. He tells Obi-Wan that he's going to Tatooine, but he's not there by the time Reva gets there. You may say, perhaps he just didn't get there yet. But I ask you, how did Bail Organa, a wealthy senator, not arrive on Tatooine before a severely wounded Inquisitor whose ship should have been confiscated by the Imperials? We'll ignore that for now. How is she even alive? If Qui-Gon Jinn, a fully trained Jedi Master, couldn't survive a single stab wound, then how did Reva, a much less skilled Inquisitor, survive not one, but 2 stab wounds? Between this and the Force healing ability introduced in The Rise of Skywalker and The Mandalorian, I'm starting to not care when characters receive supposedly mortal wounds. Does this franchise have any stakes anymore? Of course Reva doesn't kill Luke, because that would break the canon of the franchise, and we have a legitimately good scene between her and Obi-Wan where she asks him if she has become like Vader. He tells her that she just chose not to, and I thought in that moment she was going to die, having chosen not to become that which she swore to destroy, letting go of the one thing that has kept her alive, her anger. But no, she inexplicably survives for some reason, and I'm sure they'll make a spin-off about her in the future. All she amounted to, as I predicted, was a ripoff of Trilla Sudari from Jedi Fallen Order, a character driven by anger and hatred who wants revenge on the people who wronged them, only to let go of that anger and hatred in the end. Once this episode ended, my mom turned to me and said, Reva was honestly the most interesting character in the show. And I'd have to agree with that, because while she was just a ripoff of a character I've seen before, she was the only one who had a full character arc, and I can't say that about the title character of the show, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm serious. Try and tell me what Obi-Wan's development was over the course of this series. He stopped being a jaded recluse hiding in a cave and learned to trust people again. Okay, that's an arc we've seen 10 times over in this same franchise. Luke. And he stopped being depressed about Anakin? We didn't need to know any of this. We didn't need to know that in between the prequels and the originals, Obi-Wan became jaded, got out of his little hidey hole, trusted people again, and forgave himself for what he did to Anakin. None of this matters. It doesn't change the story. It adds nothing. If anything, this series did more to damage the overarching story than improve it. The ending was laughable, with Obi-Wan walking up to Luke and saying, "Hello there." Is that what this was? A huge meme? He sees Qui-Gon finally, and Qui-Gon goes, "Took you long enough." It took this show long enough to freaking end. As the final nail in the coffin for this series, Palpatine essentially tells Vader to give up on his search for Obi-Wan. I know they're trying to imply that he questions his loyalty or something, but why would Palpatine not consider Obi-Wan to be a true threat? If this was someone like Cal Kestis who can't even put a finger on Vader, then sure, who cares? But Obi-Wan has beaten Vader twice in combat, both times severely wounding him, but Palpatine doesn't care. This is their attempt to try to explain why Vader and Obi-Wan did not come in contact between this and A New Hope. But as with most things in this series, it doesn't make any sense. I will wrap this up by repeating what I said before this series even began. And that is that we deserve better. Better than these corporate products that pander to our nostalgia to blind us of the blatant flaws on display in these shows and movies. This series was insulting as a Star Wars fan. The writing was incoherent and lazy, the direction bland and uninspired, and the character development was so surface level and boring. I enjoyed very little about this show. But some people are really liking it. I know some people who have loved it, and that's great. I am so happy for those people that they found something to love about this show, but I want better. It's not like the people at Lucasfilm are incapable of telling good stories. They did just a year ago with The Bad Batch. I think season 1 of that show is great to this day. But as much as I hate to admit it, Marvel has been more consistent in quality this year than Star Wars. I didn't like Moon Knight, but at least it didn't damage a story I've been invested in since I was a child, and recently I started watching Miss Marvel, which I'm actually enjoying. It's a watchable show with good performances and positive messages at its core. Why has Star Wars declined so much in quality this year? The Book of Boba Fett and Kenobi are such incredible disappointments, and I'm glad that people are recognizing the problems with these shows. I think Star Wars needs to take a serious step back and reconsider their options, because if they continue down this current trajectory, I don't know how much longer I'll be able to stay invested. But you guys let me know. What are your thoughts on Obi-Wan Kenobi overall? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Just whatever your thoughts are, please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.